Yeah, if I can add to that, Bill Bryan again with the Department of Energy. Certainly during Sandy, there was a lack of situational awareness on the ground for fuels. And there were several people trying to get in the business of finding out that information, and it was very disjointed. We've taken several steps to try to identify key validated, and that's an important piece, validated data sets on the availability of this information. And I come from an analytic background, and I've been used to looking at streams of satellite data. And for those who've ever done that, it can put you to sleep in a heartbeat when you look at reams and reams of paper and pull out golden nuggets, right? But a data point is a data point. And there is not one perfect database out there that's going to give us all that information we need that's validated and trusted. But we have to piece them together. And we've made some attempts, and we've made some strides in identifying some of those data sets, and a lot of those data sets were brought to our attention by members of our interagency partners. That said, we got a piece of this. Another one said, we got a piece of that. And so we're investing our time and energy to bring those pieces together to have that situational awareness on fuels much better than we did before. And the other comment I will add also to chime into what my colleague mentioned were the state regulations for fuels. I can tell you that there was plenty of fuel available during Sandy. The issue was that regulations, legislation such as anti-gouging laws written for good reason actually prohibited fuel from getting delivered into the states. So I would say in the Gulf Coast, for the states, look at your regulations and look what you have in place that could ultimately limit or prohibit you from receiving help from outside, and look at what you need to put in place ahead of time to maybe waive some of those or put some parameters around those kinds of laws to allow fuel to come in a shortage situation.
Thanks. I want to, we do have an audience right here, including members of the press, so I wanted to put you all on the spot here and answer any questions that you may have for our panel. Yeah, go ahead. Please come up to the microphone. We have one on each side of the room.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Hansen from Platts here in town. On this same subject of waivers, I'd invite Holly from API to comment on this. You said during your remarks that there were a number of regulations that you thought would help, could be waived and would help the industry to better ramp up and respond to storms. And if I could take a second bite of the apple while I'm up here. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned that you'd reached out to industry forgive me if I got this wrong, but I thought you said something like industry representatives were going to come and work with you in your emergency operations center. I wonder if you could elaborate on that. Thanks.
Let's let Holly go first. Holly, push the button. Great.
Yes, as Cynthia mentioned, there are lots of different, state and federal regulations that affect that affect fuel delivery and supply and along the supply chain. And so during different events offshore, we've worked with the federal government to have Jones Act waivers put in place to recover from damages and to have the boats, the vessels, and the crews available to conduct the recovery efforts and to fix the damaged facilities onshore in the fuels again. As has already been mentioned several times, the different restrictions upon fuels that are in different states, and having those waivers, issued during the crisis to allow flexibility for supply to resume and operations to resume to normal.
Bill?
Sure, thank you for your question. Having the industry's large, frankly, right? And so how do you get the right folks into that meeting room or in that ops center, and what are they going to be doing? First, got to draw two very big distinctions from the electric industry versus the oil and gas industry. Very separate, very different in how they function, right? Electric industry actually own a piece of real estate. They own equipment in that real estate. They have a confined area that they're responsible for. And so when we bring in, and the representation we could have in our ops center on the electric side of the house, we anticipate having association representatives. So we'd have the investor-owned utilities, the municipalities, and the co-ops all represented in the Operations Center. We would probably have the Information Sharing and Analysis Center for the electric sector. We call that an ISAC. They would also be represented in that Operations Center to continue that information sharing, and if we needed to get that information out to a broader audience, that group would be the one to go out and do that. If it was more of a localized event or we had specific companies involved, we could also open the door to a specific company having a rep that was impacted by the event as well, okay? So in the electric side, it's very different, and they have much more, I think, say and impact and control over what they need in that region to do the job they need to do, and it's much more free flow of communication. The oil and gas sector is very different. There's much more room to be able to point the finger at someone else and saying, I can't share that with you. There's a lot of antitrust issues and concerns in the oil and gas sector. You got the upstream, the downstream, it's very big. For us, we are looking at several of the major associations and having them represented so that if we had a particular issue anywhere in the upstream or downstream side, we could go to any one of those associations, whether it was a API, whether it was a gas association, right, whether it was a terminal association, whatever that case may be, and be able to get to that guy on the ground that has the answers that we have to make the decisions that we have to make, right? So they're going to be an information conduit for us. We certainly can't violate any of the FACA or antitrust issues, and frankly, industry knows those rules much better than us and the federal government do. And they recognize that we're not going to push them for that. So we're not going to cross that line. But having them there to be able to reach out to the right folks at the right time to get the right answer is why we're going to have them in our Ops Center.
Thanks. Any more questions from the states? I'll take a moment here and just see if you have any pending ones. Okay, let me go back to our audience here in the room. Okay, I have a question, I guess, that brings us back to the actual offshore industry. You know, it's been a few years since Katrina and Rita, but back in those days, there was a significant destruction. There was certainly danger to life and a lot of property. So we've done a lot of things since then, both within the government agencies and the industry itself, but I'm sure there's more still to do. So let me pose that question to our panel. What more can be done to improve the preparedness of the offshore industry in light of the potential for a serious hurricane season this year? And maybe if we can't get it done this year, how quickly can we get it done for future years? Lars.
Go ahead, take a shot at that one. Obviously, there were a lot of lessons learned from 2005, 2008 hurricane season. A lot of effort has gone into design. We work closely with API on a lot of those design standards. Those have been implemented, but there are certain things that are difficult to implement, and in particular with existing facilities and structures. On those, another thing we learned from hurricanes, especially Katrina, Rita, that season, was that a lot of the facilities that were toppled or destroyed, along with wells that were destroyed, were wells that were no longer really had any longer future utility for the industry or for that particular company. So in 2010, we went out with what we call an idle iron initiative related to equipment, facilities, and wells that are no longer needed. Tremendous amount of cost and effort goes into trying to decommission those wells and facilities once they're toppled or destroyed. We stepped that up. Industry has stepped up to that challenge to meet that. It was I believe over 3,000 wells and over 500 facilities that we had identified. I guess the challenge to industry is to keep that up and keep that moving, and not to sit back, on your laurels from the accomplishments that we have, and we've had some relatively calm hurricane seasons in the Gulf. But the more we can do on that, then we can focus on what the real issues are.
Anyone else on that question? I guess I'll just throw a little plug to something that we mentioned yesterday, and it does involve the states, is that this decommissioning process can often involve the use of designated sites by the states offshore to put these retired structures on the seabed to be used as a habitat, as an artificial reef. And that does take the cooperation of other federal agencies and particularly the state agencies, of which we've been getting a lot of good cooperation. We put out a new policy yesterday to further encourage this. But that's an area that goes hand in hand with decommissioning the idle iron. Let me, I guess, go back to some of the issues that were raised by Gwen and I think other folks here about the need to get information to the private citizens, and sometimes that can be confusing when it has to do with things offshore. Offshore activities in general, I think, are largely unknown to the public, and yet whether it's a ship offshore at sea or a drill rig or a production platform or the pipeline infrastructure, how can we improve our communications with the public? I think there is a yearning to know what's happening when they see these big red things on their screens going across what that will probably be communicated to them by the media as 20% of the production of the United States. So let me open that up for anybody's comments.
We're doing a couple of things within the Department of Energy to help local communities and states. We actually have worked with each state to develop an energy assurance plan to help the states better prepare for these types of events. But to take it down to the consumer level, we recently, and it'll soon be posted and available online, is actually a preparedness guide for energy, an energy preparedness guide for not just the homeowner, but for the business owner and for community leaders. One thing that was very clear to us when we were on the ground after Sandy, where community leaders really did not know how to prepare their community for an energy disaster. And so this guide is, we've taken quite a large effort to put it together. We kind of wanted to use ready.gov, but we couldn't do that because FEMA took that website. So, but we're kind of mirroring something like that, and we will have that, get that URL out as soon as we get it completed. Right now, it'll probably be energy.gov as the energy website, and it'll probably be /ready, but something along those lines. But we're just doing the final look at the material, and it'll be a good, to some, it would be a common sense checklist, but I will tell you that a lot of people just don't think about this. A lot of business owners don't think about this. People assume that they'll be without power for maybe a few hours. In fact, a recent survey by Pepco here in Washington, D.C. to its customers, and they asked a customer, in a major significant disaster, how long do you think you'll be without power? And the survey came back and said 8 hours. That's what most people felt was a significant amount of time. So they're not prepared, they don't think it's going to happen to them. So putting out this guide we think is going to be helpful. We're also taking advantage, working with FEMA, of a Presidential Innovative Fellow to help us look at what we're designing as being an energy application for smart devices. And this energy app, we're looking at this app being able to do multiple things for a customer. An individual will be able to look and actually help in the assessment process by taking photographic images and having those images geolocated from their smartphones of down power lines or trees or where there's damage, and you'll be amazed at how quickly that will enhance restoration. With the advent of smart grid and smart metering, some elements of the industry are having much more situational awareness when things happen, but there's still a large segment of the utility industry that does not know there's a problem unless you pick up a phone and call them. And they don't know the extent of the problem unless they can see it. And so it takes time to get people out there to see that. And they're taking resources away from restoring to going out and doing assessments. So we're looking at developing an app that the consumer can use to help speed along that restoration process.
Thanks, Bill. Holly, maybe I could put you on the spot. Let's focus on the offshore, the very much upstream. How do we communicate better on what's actually happening out there?
Yeah, so API, we actually do have a hurricane preparedness and response webpage that that's online and on our api.org site. And on there we have a hurricane fact sheet that talks about the refining capacity in the Gulf of Mexico pipeline, also the oil and gas production information, and all of the different segments of the upstream industry that are affected or can be affected during a storm. So also we have listed our standards that we have produced to improve structural design and met ocean data, et cetera, as we've mentioned earlier, improve moorings, et cetera. So we do have that information available and posted. Obviously, the oil and gas industry and production, and as well as the supply chain and delivery of fuels, is a complex issue. We do need to do a better job of simplifying it for the consumer and communicating it in a very simple fashion that the general public can understand, and we can help us communicate the issues better. We've been working with all of our partners, the federal government as well as the state governments. API has state petroleum councils that work in all of the state with 33 states, and we work with our state partners as well to ensure again that we are communicating and cooperating amongst state, federal, local agencies and governments.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else on that one? Yes, Nadia.
Bill seemed to touch on this a little bit with the app you're developing, but I'm interested in hearing what the other agencies are doing to sort of harness the opportunities and the challenges with social media and other modern forms of communication.
Social media. We've got some initiatives going on, I know. Who wants to go first? Go ahead, Cynthia.
Well, we are very happy that we got a Twitter account earlier this year, and we are using it to send out our message to all of our constituents, and I highly recommend it to everyone on this panel. I feel like we've done a much better job of reaching all sorts of people as a result of that. So it's a great opportunity to use it in the hurricane context. We just got our ability to use YouTube. We haven't loaded up all of our things yet, but that'll be available soon as well, and that can help train people about hurricane preparedness.
Good. Noah.
I'm Paul Schlatter. I'm with the National Weather Service, and social media is huge for, before hurricane events or any significant weather event, where, at the National Hurricane Center has a Twitter account that, hundreds of thousands of followers on Facebook. They pass out information, neat graphics, ways to prepare through Facebook. And on the other end, the user end, people are allowed to tweet storm reports. They take a picture of some damage that they've seen, or they report something that they see. And the Weather Service can receive those reports in near real time and then use them to help inform future warnings and things like that. So, and then finally, we also have a new mobile app, which is pretty neat, where we allow any user out there, again, this is not so much for hurricanes, but any user out there to report the precipitation type. So say they're in a snowstorm or an ice storm, or maybe there's hail falling. With their phone, it's geotagged. They enter the type of report it is. In real time, it sends it right to a server, and we get that information in real time. We can pinpoint kind of where these things are going on through a really neat mobile app.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, I'm going to wrap up in about 5 more minutes. We did get a question from one of our web viewers, Emily Feebles, and she works for the Association of Zoos and Aquarium. And this question might be most appropriate for the folks that have been involved with the National Response Team. It has to do with response preparedness and the involvement from private organizations. She said, can you speak more about the training requirements for various emergency programs for laypersons and organizations looking to get involved before an emergency happens? So, Dana.
From the NRT perspective, we actually have some guidance for volunteers and an MOU that we have established with various agencies. So that's something that we could share with folks.
Great. Anybody from the states have a comment on that one? Because I think there's also, that question applies at the state level as much or perhaps even more so than the federal level. Okay, let's see, Bill?
I have comment, yes. I'm sorry, Joe had to step away from FEMA. This is Bill Bryan with the Department of Energy, but I know that FEMA has established a FEMA Corps made up of volunteers that proved very valuable, certainly during Sandy. It was an effort that was fairly recently stood up within the last couple of years, I believe. And I know they will take and train volunteers to support FEMA. These folks were very critical in helping during Sandy, for example, running medicines to elderly people, running water up and down high-rise apartment buildings where there was no elevator to get critical supplies and needs to people in need. So there is a valuable function for that Corps volunteer. I know in the city of Hoboken, I witnessed it myself, where a Corps of volunteers showed up and every one of their fire departments were flooded, every one of their substations were flooded. They had no emergency response capability, but these volunteers showed up and said, what do we need to do to clean this place out so you can get back up and running just as soon as you can? And it was all volunteers. So I would certainly, at least at the federal level, reach out to FEMA, look at their website, and check out the FEMA Corps.
And I guess I might just add that the Coast Guard has a very dynamic and long-standing Coast Guard auxiliary that is made up entirely of volunteers, and they do focus on offshore and near coastal type volunteer work, including environmental response. So that's another area, if you're interested in volunteering, that you could look into as a private citizen. Well, we've come very close to the end of our time period. Any final remarks or comments or questions by any of our panelists? Yes, sir, Jim.
Yes, I'd like to add one more quick comment about social media. We operate the nation's earthquake program, and believe me, the social media has totally transformed the way we communicate with people about earthquakes.
Thank you. Any other questions from folks in the room? Okay, final comments or questions from anybody on the phone? All right, well, I want to then just sort of wrap this up. I want to thank you all for participating in today's forum. This was an unprecedented opportunity to hear from this diverse group. I want to thanks to everyone here for your contributions. And I think it's important that we did take time when there's no pressing hurricane bearing down on the Gulf of Mexico to be thinking and talking about it, to ask questions. Are we really as prepared as we should be? What can we do in addition to what we've already done? As we learned today, we need to be prepared. These strong storms are unfortunately always going to be a part of life offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. I think it's our duty as the people who oversee these operations, who are supposed to be looking after the people that are living and working offshore, to do everything that we can to minimize their risk in what frankly is a risky environment this time of year on into the late fall season. So I want to thank everybody for your contributions, for the contributions I know you're going to make going forward. I know we've been having a lot of conversations here in Washington about the efforts of the Department of Energy down in the Gulf. I know everybody's rallying around Lars Herbst and Rear Admiral Kevin Cook, who's the district commander down there for the U.S. Coast Guard, and the other agencies as they work to be extremely well prepared for this hurricane season and the seasons to come in the future. So with that, thank you very much, and we will adjourn and maybe try it again next year.